Late yesterday, Q made some posts, and I am going to report on them and do it in the context of what's there, rather than go line by line. As many of you know, I have decided that's a rather wasteful use of my time. Maybe not for others, but for me. So there are half dozen posts or so, and some of them have to do with celebrating that Kavanaugh won, and that everybody's happy about that. We're looking forward to the midterms, the Republicans are, and that there is a posting here to watch Ronald Reagan. There is a comment by Q to the effect that Justice Kavanaugh is a great day for the rule of law, and that there's much work to be done, etc. There is a comment about, and this has to do with the whole idea of how the Democrats went about the Kavanaugh hearing, but much bigger than that. And it said that, first of all, that they're going to impeach Kavanaugh, where, I mean, that's absolutely impossible, and I totally agree with that. There's no potential that you could get, at least now, that you could get a majority in the House of Representatives that would vote for an impeachment. Obviously, that could change if the Democrats gained the majority in the House of Representatives. What is it? There's 30 votes or something like that off. And then it would take a 2/3 majority in the Senate. Okay, so impeaching is an indictment. And impeaching is a political indictment. It is not the conviction of the person. It's not the removal of an office. There has to be the voting on the impeachment by the Senate to terminate the person's term in office. And the House impeaches, that is, the House creates the political indictment against the person that is in office, and that takes a majority. But to remove the person from office takes a 2/3 majority in the Senate. And as Q points out, and I'm going to say it myself, that in any normal circumstance is an impossibility. It became a potential, and it would have happened with respect to Nixon, because his own party, the Republicans, were bailing from the ship. They had gotten beaten up enough, and there was enough smoke in the process of the Nixon investigation that the Republicans in the Senate pulled the plug and said, if you are formally impeached, there are enough votes in the Senate to convict you and remove you from office. And so, as some of the people who have followed on my channel have said from time to time, well, Nixon wasn't impeached, he resigned. Yeah, well, he resigned because impeachment and conviction of the impeachment in the Senate was a foregone conclusion. That's why. And so he beat the system, and he also obtained through President Ford some assurances, although they both denied it, that he would be pardoned not only for, and this is another thing for you to pay attention to, not only for anything for which he had been charged, but for anything he might have done as president under federal law for which he could be charged at all. So a person does not have to be charged with or convicted of anything to be pardoned from those acts. And that's something to pay attention to as it relates to Obama and the pardons that Obama may have given, and to the potential that there are secret pardons, even though most of the time the pardons have been listed. That's the idea, that the pardons are listed, and many of them occur at the end of someone's term. Then you get to go through the list and see who it is that they're going to pay off for everything that's happened, and everybody has done it. Everybody, for goodness knows how long, has done it. So there is a comment for power to the people, power through Red October, and then there is this comment about a wrap-up smear. which Pelosi describes in a C-SPAN interview, a 30-minute C-SPAN wrap-up, political wrap-up, in which she does this report and then takes questions, and she attempts to say, and you should know this on the face of it, it is all put in the Q context to say, here is Pelosi saying what she does. Well, what Pelosi claims she does is, and she doesn't differentiate it, of course she is going through it saying, most of the interview is saying what she's attempting to do, what the bills that are put forward, what the Republicans are doing, why the Democrats have a better idea, why she is the leader, the minority leader in the House of Representatives, how the caucus has chosen her and why, and what she thinks she brings to it. Some of them have questioned whether or not she is being used as the whipping boy, the whipping person in some of those districts in 2016, and that they smeared that the candidate, the Democratic candidate, with being aligned with Pelosi. And some of it was Pelosi responded and said, well, we do that, we don't do these kinds of things, the Republicans do these kinds of things. And then here's the wrap-up smear, and the wrap-up smear is that somebody makes a comment, the mainstream media validates it by reporting on it, then the political party or the political candidate comes back and says, well, see, it's in the New York Times, it's in the Washington Post, it's on CNN, here are the claims, and therefore because those claims are in the public media, they must be accurate, and now we can go after that candidate by saying, well, the New York Times reported that he did X, the Wall Street Journal reported, the Los Angeles Daily News reported they did X, Y, and Z. And so she, on the face of it, she is, of course, trying to make it appear that that's what the Republicans do, and that, of course, the Democrats are above that and don't do it. So, and I'm going to link the entire 30-minute C-SPAN article in this report, and that's in my notes that are just below the video. And I invite you to take a look at it. The smear comments began, the question that she was asked begins at about 25 minutes, almost at 26 minutes. And the direct quote that is pointed out in Q stuff starts at about 26:50 and goes to 27:25. And so you can see there the direct quote, but it also gives you an opportunity to see the context, and if you're so inclined, you can listen to the entire report. On the face of it, this quote that Q points is taken out of context and does not necessarily say this, that Pelosi says this is what we do on the face of it, okay? She is saying this is how these Republicans do it. But she also does not do what is obvious, and that is say we would never do that. She just describes it as a political maneuver, a political tactic that some people do. And then she moves on from it. It is obvious, and I'll give you another reference to it, it is obvious that this whole Russia-Trump thing has been one of those. It is obvious that the Russia-Trump business has been validated and processed through the whole process, and then the smearing of Manafort and everybody else in it, Cohen, and going through this, Flynn, is that you say somebody said this or it was charged and therefore it must be true, and it sticks, and of course they say it 10,000 times, and this is what went about, this is what happened as it relates to Kavanaugh, is that when Blasey Ford came forward and said I was molested by this person, and I'm sure it was that person, then everybody said, well, she sounds believable, she sounds cognizant of what she's saying, and therefore it must be true, and because it's reported in the news, it has to be true, and where there's smoke, there's fire, which I tried to point out the other day. Where there's smoke, there's fire, and this person obviously did what it is that they're charged with doing because it's being given validation in the media. And of course, as most of you know, now the media is taking the side of the Democrats, and 99% of the time, with all but a few publications, we get nothing by way of two sides or conditional comments about why this might not be true. It is simply reported, and then it is commented upon, and no longer do we have editorials. You know, when Cronkite and Howard K. Smith and the rest of these guys were on 20 or 30 years ago, there was reporting and then there was commentary. And when we got to commentary, the person put the invective in it and said, well, I don't like this, or this may not be true, or it must not be true, and this is what's wrong with this guy. We no longer have that. Every cub reporter talking about water problems in the periphery of a tornado or a hurricane will make a political comment that is simply passed through as truth. Well, Trump, because Trump is against the environment, you can see here that there's a 10-inch flood and overflow in this little stream I'm standing in, and therefore it is the problem of the Republicans and Trump. Hold it, hold it. Yeah, why do you say that? It's idiotic. So let me give you another example, and this has to do with Harry Reid, the former Nevada senator, who stepped in 2016 trying to keep Bernie Sanders from getting the nomination. And when the caucuses in Nevada happened, Harry Reid claimed that he was neutral. And through the process, he claimed neutrality. And then he slipped in and helped pump that Sanders was a bad guy and Sanders was lying. And one of the things they used was that black congressman, civil rights leader, I think he's from South Carolina, said that as a civil rights hero, he had never seen Bernie Sanders in any of the civil rights stuff. Well, Harry Reid and the Clintons took that to mean that Bernie Sanders was lying about having been involved in the civil rights movement in the 60s and smeared him with it. And then when there was a rapper called Killer Mike came up, they misconstrued what he said, treated it as a sexist remark, flipped it, used it against Sanders and said, well, obviously Sanders is sexist if Sanders is allowing Killer Mike to be one of his spokespeople or promoters within the black community. And then, of course, Harry Reid, who claimed to have neutrality about the Clinton-Bernie primary situation, went in and got one of the unions, the biggest single union in Nevada. Let me see which I can get if I can grab it right now. But it was an interesting deal because they got this entire union. It's the culinary workers in Las Vegas, and they called around and got all those people excused for a couple hours, did the caucus, and Reid got the casinos to release these people to go to the caucus, and the people therefore were able to go, and maybe even some of them were even paid while they were on leave from their work to go. And 6 casinos, caucuses favoring Clinton over Sanders, were voted in. So there's this slimeball back trail, ongoing stuff. When Reid, and I can't give you the exact quote, but when Reid was asked about why and how he had done that and how that violated his own claim of neutrality, he said, well, we won, didn't we? In other words, the tactics I use to get to the place where I end up are my own business, and you should not be concerned about the fact that I use underhanded tactics in order to win. That's what I did, and we won, and so now it's a moot issue. It doesn't matter whether I was lying about my neutrality. It doesn't matter whether I was working behind the scenes. It doesn't matter whether I played games, and we actually did promotions and politicking at the caucuses, which they did. They told the culinary workers, here's what you should do, and they promoted it as part of the process and then ran the caucuses, even though they're supposed to maintain neutrality. So it was all a giant scam, and it is in conformance with the way that they have gone against Trump on the Russian stuff, against his associates, Flynn, Manafort, and others, and that they have gone and that they flipped it. I mean, this is the part of the deal, the biggest part of the deal. It's absolutely fascinating that it's projection. So when Hillary Clinton is getting special deals with Uranium One, is getting political contributions, is working behind the scenes, her trust is making vast amounts of money, and she's slipping stuff through her own server to China and is working with both China and Russia and giving them benefits. What you do then is not say, well, no, gee, we're going to defend against that. What you do is you project it onto the other guy, and what they did is project the whole Russian connection onto Trump and did it with plants that they had put into the campaign, and then the FISA warrants and the rest of it. So it is so filthy and so underhanded, and the fact that technically speaking, the quote that Q gives is about Pelosi describing what underhanded political operatives would do, implying that the Republicans might do it. What she goes on to say is that the mainstream media has to pick it up, has to validate it, has to promote it, and then they can flip it and wrap it up. It's a wrap-up deal then, because then they can take the mainstream media and roll it over and use it against the person that's been smeared. So that's the deal. There's no reason for me to go out beyond that, but it is crazy stuff. All right, so there is also, the final comment shows Hillary Clinton being kissed by, what the heck's his name? I can't, Robert Byrd, and showing how the Democrats have been on the dark side of the major civil rights movements, but you have to recognize the 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, and 15th Amendment are 150 years old, 170, whatever it is, years old. So it doesn't exactly validate the Republican Party as it currently exists. It is worth noting, historically worth noting. All right, so that's the where we sit on this political campaign stuff. Most of the people who are opposed to Clinton and the rest of this see through this, see the transparency of it, unfortunately, and we see this with people that the sheep that follow the mainstream media. There are a lot of people that use these quotations and don't pay attention to the fact that it has been flipped, projected, it is a lie, it is validated by the mainstream media even though it's false, and that it was originally planted by the people who wanted to use it against the person that is being besmirched. It's crazy stuff. I had a meeting at a writing group a week or so ago. There was an older woman who was an obvious Democrat, and when we got done talking about it, she said, well, you know, I could not decide who was telling the truth between Kavanaugh and Blasey Ford. You'd have to shoot me if you made me decide. And I thought it was fascinating that on the face of it, both of them had some credibility in their comments. That is, they looked credible as they presented their comments, until you looked at the credibility and the backing and the facts and the responsibility, the corroboration, the lies, the lack of information, the inadequacy of the report, and then you say, well, all of those count against Blasey Ford, and that's how you would decide who was credible. I would be loath to have that woman on a jury where I was trying to get them to acquit somebody, because they could not make their minds up on the basis of two people's testimony. They would allow for the two people's testimony, and no matter how many times this person's testimony was shown to be inaccurate, inadequate, not corroborated, invalidated by her own witnesses and the rest of that, these two still look even. And that's craziness. Thanks so much for watching. I think this gives us, or at least as I see it, it gives us some kind of context by which to look at this. And I encourage you to take a look at the C-SPAN interview, at least the last 10 minutes of it, from 20 minutes on, to get Pelosi's comments in context, because now we have an honest statement about what she was attempting to say, even though she was showing her own colors as she did it. Thanks so much for watching.